Oregon Global Warming Commission. So welcome to commissioners and those that are joining us from the public. This will be the last meeting under the name Oregon Global Warming Commission. In January, we will be converting over to our new moniker, the Oregon Climate Action Commission, which the legislature gave us as part of the modernization elements for the commission in House Bill 3409. So excited about that. Talked with the Department of Energy staff, and they are starting to think about how to migrate over our webpage and perhaps give us a new logo. So if there are any commissioners that are interested in that and might want to have conversations with the with staff at Odo to help think about that and what we should make sure we're focusing in on our web presence, feel free to let me know and or Zach know. We've got an exciting agenda. You could go to the agenda slide. Today we'll hear from Zach about an update to where we are with the work plan. We're going to hear from DEQ on work they are doing as part of implementation of House Bill 3409 regarding Oregon's consumption-based emissions, and a report that they are due to provide to the legislature. We're going to hear about the direction that DEQ and Odo are going relative to the climate pollution reduction grant and the priority climate action plan that I believe we will be, the governor has asked us to review and approve the action plan. I'm assuming that's going to happen sometime in February, but we can hear more details from the agencies when we get there. We'll hear a presentation from Debbie Colbert with the governor's office and a number of state agencies on their ideas about how to best invest the $10 million in Natural and Working Lands Fund that the legislature awarded us in the last legislative session. I also wanted to just thank those who provided comments on the Institute for Natural Resources Natural and Working Lands report that we discussed at our last meeting. We got a number of very detailed comments and very useful and constructive comments. So thanks to those who submitted those comments. We will have time for public comments again today, and we expect that to occur about 2:30, but it might move up or back a little bit. Zach, would you mind reminding people of how they can sign up to provide public comment at today's meeting?
Sure. Hi, everyone. If you'd like to make public comment, there are two ways you can let us know. You can either drop a note in the chat saying that you'd like to make public comment, or if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a smiley face, and then right next to that is a hand, and you can just raise your hand to indicate that you'd like to make public comment when the chair asks, or I ask when we get to the public comment period time.
Great, thank you. Excellent. Well, with that, I'll go ahead and take roll call and then open the floor for commissioner updates. So starting with the voting members, I have Commissioner Shippentauer. You just say aye. Might be on mute. Commissioner Shippentauer. I'm back. Commissioner Jackson.
Aye.
Commissioner Reitman.
Aye.
Commissioner Ross.
Aye.
Commissioner After.
Aye.
Commissioner Ford.
Aye.
Commissioner Sheeran.
Aye.
Going back to Commissioner Shippentauer. I will just note that Commissioner Shippentauer is on. So hopefully we'll hear from her a little bit later. And then I see also maybe that Kelly Dundon, who is sitting in for Commissioner Anderson. Is that correct?
Hi. Yep, that's correct.
Welcome. Excellent. And then moving over to our elected officials, have Representative Levy. I believe you are on. Representative Levy, you might be on mute. Okay, we'll move on. I don't see any other elected officials all today. But I'll watch out for folks if they have to join late. And then Garrett Martin standing in for Commissioner Decker. I think you're with us.
Yeah, just having trouble getting off my double mute, but I'm here.
No worries. Thank you. Welcome. Okay. Well, with that, I'll just open the floor. Are there any updates that commissioner members want to provide this morning? Or this afternoon, I guess. I don't see any.
Commissioner Reitman here. I'd just like to thank the people that commented, as you have already stated, about the natural and working lands document. And so as it's apparent to me that we have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of information out there. So
Absolutely.
we'll
Yeah, thank you.
try to build on it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then I know Zach is going to touch on the open commission seats. So we can certainly do that in the next agenda item. And if there are no other updates from folks, I'll go ahead and hand things over to Zach and you can talk to us about where we are with the input with work plan.
Sounds good. Thank you. Yeah, so just to remind folks, we have been providing updates at each of our monthly meetings just to share with folks how we're doing on the draft work plan that we put out earlier this year. And so just wanted to continue that conversation. And there's a lot going on. So I'll give you some key status updates. And the first one is what Chair McDonald was just alluding to, which is that we're continuing to encourage applications for the new and existing open Oregon Global Warming Commission member seats. We've been getting a good response from folks and hoping to get a few more applications to then be able to work with the governor's office on getting folks appointed. And so as a reminder, there are 5 voting member seats looking for members with particular experience in environmental justice, a youth member, and a fishing industry member. Those 3 are new members under the legislation coming out of the last session. And then we have 2 open seats, existing member seats, which are for manufacturing, and 1 at-large seat. And then we also have 3 non-voting at-large member seats. And those seats need to be represented from a state agency or academic institution. So there's a link that is linked to the applications there that takes you to the Governor's Board and Commission website where folks can submit applications. And of course, the chair and myself are happy to answer any questions about service on the commission or any other questions about these seats. And then another exciting update is that we've started moving forward with the hiring process for a number of the new positions, starting with the climate lead position, which will then be able to work to bring on the other positions that came out of the legislature to support the Global Warming Commission's work. And then we are continuing to reevaluate the RFP related timelines in the draft work plan, which we've been talking about for a number of months here, and hoping with the hiring process to then be able to start really zeroing in on how we can accomplish the work in those particular areas under the draft work plan with the capacity that we'll have as we get new hires on board. And then there's been a lot of work on the natural working lands work. As we discussed at the last meeting, we kind of ran through setting up the Natural Working Lands Advisory Committee. And so the commission delegated next steps on that to a commission subcommittee, which is planning to meet to move forward on that process. We are reviewing the public comments on the Institute for Natural Resources final report to help inform next steps on the natural working lands work. And I'll also at this point add my thank you for all of the time and energy that went into providing comments to us. And then, as you'll hear later this afternoon, the governor's office has continued to coordinate on the Natural Working Lands Fund, and excited to hear that presentation later today. And then we've been saying over the last couple of months that it was likely that we were going to need to pursue legislative deadline changes for many of the natural working lands deliverables, just because of the amount of work and trying to bring on new staff and all of the other work at the agency. And so we are planning to pursue those changes, and just want to give you a general sense of what that's looking like. So the idea is, because of all the work that's been going on the fund part of the Natural Working Lands work, we would leave those deadlines alone. And there are two reports, one due in September and then one due in December for the fund. And so those deadlines would stay the same. But then for the rest of the natural working lands deliverables, we are looking to push those deadlines out for a year. So basically each of those deadlines would just move a year out. And so there's at the same time that we're working on that, we're also working really hard internally to move the ball forward with coordination with all the agencies. And as we get new folks on board, we'll be able to really accelerate that work. So thanks for the patience and understanding on us trying to move all the balls forward at the same time as we try and get new staff on board. And then the last update, which Chair McDonald covered, is just want to make sure folks know that our name change is starting January 1. And so moving from the Oregon Global Warming Commission to the Oregon Climate Action Commission. And the team, our communications team here, is working really hard to make sure that that transition is smooth from our website and internal communications using our name. And so there may be times over the next month that you go to the website and there may be a page that is down as it's being updated, or something doesn't look right. So just bear with us as we try to make that change, hopefully seamlessly. If you see something that doesn't look right for a while, please reach out to us. It's basically a Control F, find the Oregon Global Warming Commission and change the Oregon Climate Action Commission. But there is a lot of references that we need to update. And so we'll be working to do that, and certainly appreciate additional eyes if you see anything on the website or in our communications that don't match. And so that's my update there, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Zach. I also wanted to note that Alan Zelinka is here on behalf of Odo for Janine, our Director Benner. And Gabriella is also here for the Health Authority. welcome, Gabriella. And I didn't make a check mark, but I think I called your name, Commissioner Sharon, but just in case I didn't, I wanted just to make sure that you were on record of being here.
I am here.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Well, with that, I think we can get to our next agenda item.
Okay, and I'm gonna work on getting up the slides for David Alloway from DEQ, and so just give me a second.
Excellent. Welcome, David. We're really glad to have you back and presenting on this really important piece of our understanding of our emissions in Oregon, the consumption-based emissions report.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad to be here. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Wonderful. Shall I just take it away? Alrighty.
Yes, please.
Well, okay, so good afternoon, members of the Commission. I'm David Alloway. I'm a science and policy analyst at the Oregon DEQ. I've been working on the topic of consumption-based greenhouse gas emissions with a particular focus on materials since the time of Governor Kulongoski's advisory group on global warming. I think that dates me a bit. And then the subsequent creation of this commission. Next slide, please. Today, I'm going to provide an introduction to Oregon's consumption-based emissions inventory in order to queue up a discussion about how this commission would like to engage in the development of a new report to the legislature that DEQ is directed to prepare. So first, I'll provide just a little bit of background and context. Consumption-based emissions are emissions that result from or are associated with satisfying consumption by Oregon. And consumption is defined in economic terms as final demand. It's the purchase of energy, goods, and services by households and governments, and one form of purchases by businesses. Consumption is understood by economists to be a root driver of economic activity, so the consumption lens offers a view into the root causes of climate change. These consumption-based emissions can occur anywhere in the world, and just as an example, Oregon uses a lot of concrete. Concrete is a mixture of sand, water, gravel, and cement. Cement is a very emissions-intensive product to make, and much of the cement that goes into concrete used here in Oregon is not produced here in Oregon. For the most part, those emissions are not included in Oregon's sector-based inventory, which by convention is the inventory that is used to track progress towards the state's goals. And yet, there are some very easy actions that can be taken here in Oregon to reduce the carbon intensity of this concrete and cement, actions that would benefit the climate, even though the emissions reductions don't count towards state goals. The dynamic here is perhaps similar to how the sector-based inventory also excludes carbon flux associated with natural and working lands, and yet the Commission has chosen to make that a focus of your work. Next slide, please. So why do we care about consumption-based emissions? Well, because we understand that we here in Oregon contribute to these emissions. They are a result of our consumption decisions and the underlying economic systems and signals that shape those decisions. By extension, we have opportunities to reduce these emissions, including through policy. The fact that some of these emissions originate out of state is not very relevant. We are facing a global climate crisis. The climate does not stop at Oregon's borders, and Oregon can take actions to reduce these emissions. And that's what's intriguing about this topic, is that the consumption-based inventory uncovers additional opportunities to reduce emissions. And in the case of climate protection, knowing of more opportunities to reduce emissions is better than knowing of fewer. A larger toolbox provides more options than a smaller toolbox. Next slide, please. We're not talking about a small quantity of emissions here. This Venn diagram shows the overlap between the sector-based and consumption-based inventories for 2015. That's the last year we have inventories for both. The circle on the left is the sector-based inventory at 63 million metric tons. The circle on the right is the consumption-based inventory at 89 million metric tons. The orange crescent on the left are in-state emissions associated with producing goods and services that we export. Those are unique to the sector-based inventory. The big aqua crescent on the right are emissions in other states and countries associated with producing goods and services that we import for consumption. that Crescent contains 51 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, almost as large as the entire sector-based inventory itself. It is entirely additional to that sector-based inventory, and yet it hasn't been widely incorporated into most climate discussions. Oregon was, however, the first US state to produce a consumption-based inventory, and this commission has supported that analysis since its inception. Thank you. The recent TIGR analysis included 2 consumption-based measures that were found to offer significant greenhouse gas reduction potential. Your roadmap to 2030 included several recommendations on this topic. Again, thank you very much for those. And there is emerging a general sense that there may be some important opportunities in this space that haven't been very well explored. That sense, reflected in this commission's recommendation to study this topic more closely, ultimately resulted in Section 52 of this year's House Bill 3409. Next slide, please. Section 52 directs DEQ to provide a report to the legislature by September of next year. The report must evaluate opportunities to reduce these emissions. Specifically, it must include an update to Oregon's inventory, recommendations for regularly updating that inventory, opportunities to reduce consumption-based emissions through state programs or policies, and an evaluation of the economic, social, and environmental effects of such reductions. The report may include recommendations for legislation, and DEQ is required to prepare the report in consultation with this commission. In a moment, I will share a bit more detail about the inventory itself and a sampling of some of the types of policies and programs that we might evaluate in this study, and will then turn to a discussion of how this commission would like to be consulted in this study. But Chair, if it's okay with you, I might just pause here for a moment to see if there's any clarifying questions about what I've shared so far.
That sounds great. Any questions for David? David, how many other states have now started doing consumption-based emissions? Do you have a sense?
Thank you, Chair. Minnesota was the second state. Maine currently has one underway, and there's an effort to produce these inventories for multiple states in the Northeast. Washington State is talking about it, and importantly, the US EPA is developing a tool that would allow any state to conduct a very rapid screening level consumption-based inventory. There's also a separate effort coming out of University of California, Berkeley, to develop consumption-based emissions inventories for every local government in California. And there are several hundred other local governments across the country and the world that have developed these as well.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other questions, I'll just proceed. There'll be time at the end for more. Okay, thank you. So Zach, next slide, please.
It does. Sorry, it does look like we had one question. Susan Pickman from ODOT. And I think she might need to be promoted to a panelist to be able to speak.
While we're in a pause, I also wanted to note that Judith Kellens is here representing Oregon Department of Agriculture.
Susan, did you want to ask a question?
Also want to note that Lisa Phipps and Cody Meyer are here representing DLCD.
Okay, hand was a mistake, so we'll keep moving on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so going on to the next slide then. To the inventory itself, Oregon developed its first inventory for calendar year 2005, and that was published in 2011. Zach, can you please advance to the next slide? Thanks. This was the first subnational consumption-based inventory in North America. And again, I want to thank the Commission for supporting what at the time was very unfamiliar and pioneering work. We subsequently published updates for 2010 and 2015, and we had an update plan for 2019, which was put on hold for 4 years due to some other priorities that emerged. You could click forward, please. And as I mentioned in my response to the chair, while Oregon pioneered this approach, there have been since more than 100 consumption-based inventories in the US. There's very exciting methodological advancements. There's been a lot of recent analysis looking at emissions embodied in global trade. There's this outfit performing CBEIs at the level of individual census tracts. And the screenshot of that is shown here. And then EPA is publishing this tool, as I mentioned, to make these emissions inventories available for every state, while also expanding the scope beyond climate to also address resource demands and other forms of air and water pollution resulting from local consumption. So now, some top-line findings from Oregon's own inventory. Next slide, please. First, Oregon's consumption-based inventory in orange has risen significantly and also diverged from the state's sector-based inventory. If you'll click through, please. You'll see that back in 1990, they were quite close. By 2005, the gap between them doubled. Nope, sorry, thank you. And that gap doubled again in 2015. And there's several possible explanations for this. Perhaps state policy has had some effect at tamping down those sector-based emissions as intended, even as the growth in consumption has outpaced efficiency and production has shifted to areas in the world with more emissions intensive practices, because there was definitely some outshoring of production happening during this period. Okay, next slide, please. Just want to reiterate the magnitude of the emissions in that aqua crescent at approximately 51 million metric tons of CO2e. This inventory shines a light on the vast quantity of emissions that Oregon contributes to and which have not historically been a focus of climate policy. Next slide, please. Major categories of consumption-based emissions are shown here, with the largest at the bottom. And in this bar chart, dark blue are emissions that occur upstream of the consumer, aqua are use phase emissions, and orange are emissions from disposal. So you'll see that vehicles and parts contribute the most, and these emissions are dominated by the use phase, that's fuel use, as well as life cycle impacts of those fuels. Although the production of vehicles in dark blue themselves is not trivial. The next largest contributor is food. And even though 40% of the food used, produced or imported for consumption into this country is wasted, almost all of these emissions occur upstream in production, in agriculture and manufacturing. Disposal in orange contributes relatively little to those emissions. Next up is appliances, such as furnaces and air conditioning, which are dominated by use phase emissions. And I just want to call out one other major category, which is construction. Again, most of these emissions are upstream, and these are mostly resulting from producing building materials such as concrete, steel, and carpet. The next slide shows.
David, before you move on, am I correct in understanding that the emissions that are upstream of purchase are still downstream from the farm gate? So not including what happens on farms, but kind of what happens between the farm and the, or do I have that wrong?
Chair McDonald, I regret that you do have it wrong.
Okay.
These pre-purchase emissions are all emissions that occur upstream of purchasing, including on-farm emissions.
Okay, thank you.
What's not included here are emissions associated with carbon flux in land use. So for example, enteric fermentation emissions, which are included in both the EPA and the state sector-based inventories, emissions from the burping of methane by cattle, are shown here. But changes in carbon associated with land use, either increased or decreased storage of carbon due to range practices, are not.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then going on to the next slide, this is the same chart, but this time showing where in the world these emissions physically originate. Only about a third of them originate inside Oregon's borders. 44% originate elsewhere in this country, with 22% in other nations. But again, I would just say that out of state doesn't necessarily mean out of reach. Oregon's clean electricity mandate and the clean fuels program both explicitly address out-of-state emissions, so there are important precedents for reaching out-of-state through policy. Next slide. Viewed through the lens of consumption, the direct consumption, that is final demand of electricity and fuels, contribute 11 and 12% respectively, while consumption of services and materials contribute relatively more. Materials in dark blue clock in at about 41% of the total. And finally, this last graph from our study, next slide please, shows average consumption-based emissions by household by income strata. And this confirms what many of you probably already intuit, which is that lower income households, which tend to be more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and have less ability to adapt to it, are also contributing less to emissions on average, while higher income households are contributing more to climate change on a per household basis, and by extension have greater opportunities to reduce those emissions. So this is just a sampling of what the consumption-based emissions inventory shows us. There's so much more, but in the interest of time, I'll pivot now to the legislative study itself. Next slide. Section 52 of House Bill 3409 directs DEQ to identify opportunities to reduce these emissions, including an evaluation of economic, social, and environmental impacts. And of course, we're going to update the inventory itself. And then to match the process that this commission is familiar with through TIGR, we're exploring the option of forecasting these consumption-based emissions and then producing both a wedge analysis and a marginal abatement cost curve that would compare a variety of different policies and programs. We're going to focus on opportunities that are not already addressed through existing climate policy. So emissions from direct consumption of electricity and fuels will probably not be a primary focus of this. Research, as those topics have already gotten a lot of airtime so far. Instead, given the significant additions, what's really sort of unique here are the inclusion of the emissions associated with food and the built environment and other materials. We expect to probably highlight those. And I will share a few examples now of the types of policies and programs that this study might explore, just to give you a flavor of what we might be looking at. Next slide, please. On the topic of food, one leading opportunity involves reducing the wasting of food at the source. Around 1/3 of all food produced or imported for consumption into this country is never eaten. And there are significant climate impacts associated with producing those wasted foods. Oregon has championed a voluntary partnership with industry called the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment. And this project is uncovering opportunities to reduce food waste and loss and emissions across the food system. For example, a recent assessment at Bob's Red Mill found multiple opportunities to reduce emissions. One, for example, would reduce food loss that occurs during the package filling process. And this one measure could reduce emissions by 1,800 metric tons of CO2e and save more than $3 million annually. So this is like energy efficiency, but applied to the world of materials. Expanding the reach of this program, which is a partnership with Washington, California, major food retailers, and Food Northwest, could help to scale these types of reductions. Next slide, please. In the built environment space, the Legislative Task Force on Resilient and Efficient Buildings recently advanced a series of policy recommendations, one of which addresses the embodied carbon of building materials. Section 7 of House Bill 3409 requires the Building Codes Division, in consultation with DEQ, to study opportunities to address embodied carbon of building materials in code and other means. The Pacific Coast Collaborative will soon publish a low carbon construction action plan, which will include several more actions related to reducing the embodied carbon in the built environment. And there are opportunities involving both voluntary and mandatory impact assessment and disclosure, as well as design mandates. Click forward, please. Just as an example of this, a DEQ-led pilot project with Oregon's concrete industry recently resulted in over 1,500 different concrete mixes being labeled with an EPD, or Environmental Product Declaration, essentially a carbon label. And these labels have helped to increase both supply and demand for low carbon concrete. The city of Portland is now limiting embodied carbon for concrete in city construction projects. Marin County, California has taken this a step further and placed embodied carbon limits on concrete for all permitted projects. Next slide. We also expect that there's more opportunity on this topic of disclosure, given evidence that when businesses evaluate and publicly disclose environmental impacts, they're more likely to reduce those impacts. And that's just one example of what might be called broadly product policy, incentives and regulations at the level of products sold into the state. Oregon has extensive experience with one narrow form of product policy, which is called extended producer responsibility, or EPR, whereby producers of electronics devices, paint, medicines, and mattresses are now obligated to share in end-of-life management obligations. In 2021, the legislature expanded that concept to packaging and printing and writing paper, and also expanded the scope. This newest law includes standards, incentives, and mandates for impact disclosure, including carbon footprint, and those could be expanded to additional materials. The same new law also provides for a significant new fund paid for by producers, which could be used both to support the transition away from single-use packaging to reusable packaging, and could also be used for industrial decarbonization projects, both inside Oregon and out. But again, only in the supply chain of packaging and printed paper. The concept, however, of product policy could be further expanded. Other policy opportunities involve state procurement, extending the lifespan of products, such as through right to repair, and other solutions that look to shift consumption in ways that reduce emissions while improving social outcomes. Next slide, please. Okay, well, that was a lot, and it's just a flavor of what we might be looking at in the study, and we very much want to consult with and involve the commission as a whole, as well as individual commissioners to the extent you have bandwidth and interest. Most of this work is going to occur between the months of February and June of next year, and I know you already have a pretty full dance card for those months, but we would love to have your engagement where possible. So I'd like to turn it back to the chair. We may have time for a few questions and then a conversation about how you'd all like to engage, and a process proposal shown on this slide that the chair will introduce. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Great presentation. Any questions for David? Zach, if you can help me monitor the.
I don't see any hands at the moment.
Okay, well, maybe we can go ahead and talk about the process, and then if people have questions, happy to take them. So David and Zach and I had a chance to talk earlier this month and talk through some one option that we've got here on this slide, where we would establish a subcommittee. And we talked about that at our August meeting, of the practice of starting to use subcommittees to dig in on topics. So far, we have established a Natural and Working Land subcommittee to help with some of the work on that front. This would pull together a second group of commissioners who might want to work with DEQ from February to May, and then we would see the recommendations would come before the full commission, probably sometime between May and July, and then the DEQ would wrap up the report for the legislature, and then this fall we would consider what DEQ's report says and look at opportunities to include recommendations in our 2024 biennial report to the legislature. So that was kind of the process that we thought would be a good process for us to follow. Any thoughts about the process or different ideas about how we might engage?
And Chair McDonald, Commissioner Apter has her hand up.
Thank you. Commissioner Apter?
Yes, thank you. I don't necessarily have a question. I think this looks great in terms of an initial proposal for commission engagement and process. Just curious, David, if you could maybe share a little more in terms of how this fits into DEQ's broader process. I imagine I'm curious, who else you're consulting, or if there's going to be a formal stakeholder group, or just who else is being consulted in either a formal or other capacity.
Chair McDonald and Commissioner Apter, thank you for that question. We're just getting ourselves organized on this, and so we haven't made any firm plans yet on how we're going to consult with the broader community. Would appreciate your suggestions and feedback if you think there's an approach for a particular community that we should focus on. Thank you.
Sure. I'll just quickly respond. I mean, I think based on what you shared in terms of just developments and methodology and recognizing, other states since Oregon initially initiated this consumption-based inventory have also made progress. I imagine looking outside our state where there's expertise and opportunities to learn from what other jurisdictions are considering or other recommendations. Also thinking about even, I don't know, like if national labs, or just thinking about like federal funding opportunities as well. I was reminded of in your mention of industrial decarbonization, might be some expertise at the federal level to consider as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Apter.
Chair McDonald.
Commissioner Ford.
Thank you. David, thanks for the great presentation. It was very informative. And two, I agree with Commissioner Apter. I think after this approach seems pretty logical to me, and I like the idea of continuing to utilize subcommittees to help us dive a little bit deeper into this, where the full commission may not have the time to really kind of peel the onion back a bit on some of these kind of technical and examples of where there's so much information out there. I mean, it's there's a lot of things to think about, but so I generally support what you're proposing here with the approach. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ford. Others? Seeing any other? Well, I will reach out to folks, but also feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in participating on the subcommittee. Just as a reminder, we can only have if we end up over our number of commissioners that create a quorum, then it's an official meeting of the commission. So we have to just stay below that. And obviously our numbers are going up in January. So we'll just need to be a little mindful of that, but would love to have folks volunteer. And if I hear none, I will twist some arms. So, thank you. David, thank you so much for the presentation. It was really great. And it's so helpful for us to see our emissions in different ways to, as you've said so aptly, to really have as big a toolbox as we can have to reduce emissions.
Thank you so much. That's why we did this inventory in the first place, and are looking forward to moving the proverbial ball down the field at least a few yards.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Okay. I think we can go to our next agenda item, which again is DEQ. And I believe Colin is going to be kicking things off for DEQ to help us understand the priority climate action plan work that the DEQ and Odo have been leading. Over to you, Colin.
Great, thank you, Chair McDonald. Just want to confirm you have audio and video for me?
I have audio. It
Okay.
doesn't look like we have your video.
Wait, I can see you, Colin.
There we go. There we go.
Okay, then
Thank
I'll
you.
wave. All right. Thank you, Chair McDonald. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. Thank you for having us today. I am Colin McConaughey, and I manage our Office of Greenhouse Gas Programs at the Department of Environmental Quality. Thank you again for having us today to update you on Oregon's climate pollution reduction grant efforts, and specifically on the development of the Priority Climate Action Plan that is due to EPA on March 1st, less than 3 months from now. As we noted to the Commission back in May, when we provided an overview of the climate pollution reduction grant that EPA had just awarded us at that time, the timeline to create a priority climate action plan would be, and I will confirm now has been, incredibly fast. Since we were last in front of the Commission, significant progress has been made, including many outreach and engagement events, as well as our hiring a position dedicated to the climate pollution reduction grant work. So today, we want to update you on that progress, as well as inform you about where we believe the state is headed with our our priority climate action plan. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program is one of many federal funding opportunities provided in the Federal Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Like several other portions of that federal legislation, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program is aimed squarely at reducing climate pollution, and it complements other programs that also address both climate pollution and equity via the administration's Justice 40 initiative. There are 3 stated primary objectives articulated for the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. The first is to create comprehensive pathways for reducing climate pollution and ensuring that investments maximize benefits to local communities, to states, and to regions across the country. The second objective is to provide flexible planning resources for jurisdictions in order to maximize emission reductions from investments to implement those plans. And then the third objective is to drive transformative and scalable decarbonization efforts in key sectors across jurisdictions and across the country. The Inflation Reduction Act charges EPA with the implementation of the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant portion, and the EPA has announced earlier that they are going to implement the CPRG via 2 separate efforts. The first effort is to develop climate mitigation plans, and EPA has provided states like Oregon with funds to develop 2 separate planning efforts. The first plan is that Priority Climate Action Plan, or PCAP, that I already mentioned and that we're going to be exploring more in this presentation. I will note that the second plan is what EPA calls a comprehensive climate action plan, and I am sure that we will be discussing the comprehensive climate action plan with the Commission over the course of the next 2 years as we develop that. But that is not the focus today. The focus today is on that Priority Climate Action Plan, and that in turn is focused on identifying actions for near-term funding opportunities. Given the timeline and the focus on federal funding opportunities, not all climate mitigation possibilities can or should be included in priority climate action plans. However, climate mitigation opportunities that are not included in states' priority climate action plans may be and likely will be included subsequently as we develop that comprehensive climate action plan. And I will stress that what goes into states' priority climate action plans is what then defines the eligible climate mitigation measures that can compete for the second effort that EPA is conducting under the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, which is to award competitive grants to implement those measures. And so today we will review our progress and approach for developing Oregon's Priority Climate Action Plan. And for that, I am going to hand the presentation over to our new Climate Pollution Reduction Grant staff lead, Morgan Schaefer.
Welcome, Morgan.
Thank you. Thanks for having us today, Chair McDonald and Commissioners. As Colin mentioned, my name is Morgan Schaefer, and I'm here to talk to you about the Priority Climate Action Plan, or what we call the PCAP. So, slide, please. I want to let you know that the information that I'm presenting today was done in collaboration with Whitney Dorr at DEQ, as well as Zach Baker at ODO. But due March 1st, our Priority Climate Action Plan will be a compilation of near-term 3 to 5 year implementation-ready priority greenhouse gas reduction measures. There's many requirements for the PCAP, including a greenhouse gas inventory, low income and disadvantaged communities benefit analysis, and review of authority to implement shovel-ready projects. That is just a few of the many requirements for this plan. And there are a number of others that we're also working on. EPA has framed key sectors to address greenhouse gas reductions, which are shown in the image on this slide. We aren't required to address all of these, but it offers a way for us to focus the development of action. Oregon is well positioned for this work, having already created extensive inventories and future planning, some of which you heard David talk about today, including the Commissioner's recent work on the roadmap to 2030. Slide, please. Our goal is to utilize the work already done in our state by building on existing analyses, policies, and programs. For the $4.3 billion EPA is anticipating to award for implementation grants, there will be between 32 and 115 grants awarded nationally for the general competition. That is not many grants. With this in mind, we are focusing the actions to be included in the PCAP to also be those that meet the criteria for the implementation grant and maximize our greenhouse gas reductions for Oregon. The development of the PCAP has been on a short time scale, so we are utilizing past feedback and efforts to inform this plan, as well as working with other state agencies, tribes, and local jurisdictions to get input and shape the plan. To align goals and avoid duplication of actions, we're also collaborating with Metro, who is leading the local PCAP effort with the Portland Hillsborough Vancouver MSA, which was the only MSA large enough in Oregon to also be eligible for planning funds from the EPA under the CPRG program. We plan to submit a single state-led grant application that echoes the PCAP. This approach is in alignment with the EPA's guidance and makes the state more competitive for the limited amount of grant awards and will include local and statewide actions. This approach also reduces agencies from competing for the same funds and consolidates resource efforts. If funded, our intent is to utilize intergovernmental agreements, and memorandums of understanding to fund existing programs. The PCAP will not represent all of the needed and necessary actions in Oregon to address climate needs. Again, there will be an opportunity for further discussion of actions during the development of the comprehensive plan. Slide, please. We will be assessing actions to include in the PCAP, as I mentioned, based on the evaluation criteria provided in the implementation grant notice. So again, mirroring our PCAP to what will go into a grant application. The table here shows the scoring for the implementation grant, emphasizing greenhouse gas reductions within 5 years, as well as that low income and disadvantaged community analysis that I mentioned earlier. You can see that there is mostly emphasis on greenhouse gas measures via the point allocation, followed by budget and timely expenditure of grant funds. So those shovel-ready projects really will matter on this. Slide, please. In addition to those state agencies and local jurisdictions, we've also engaged with 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon to identify actions to include in the state's PCAP so that they can point to the state's PCAP to apply for implementation funds, as they are also eligible applicants under the program. And in fact, there are specific funds set aside for tribal nations as well. Not all tribes are developing a PCAP. However, the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians is developing one, and tribes within our state and region can point to that in addition to the state's PCAP. Engagement with interested tribes in Oregon has guided actions for inclusion for tribal priorities, and we continue to build opportunities for collaboration. Slide. DEQ has extensive experience collecting greenhouse gas emissions data. As you can see, and as you know, the largest sector-based greenhouse gas emissions is transportation, followed by residential and commercial, then industry, and then agriculture. This data has already helped Oregon time and time again in making decisions around integral programs that will help meet our climate goals. So again, on the screen here is the sector-based emission inventory. Slide, please. And here is a snapshot of the consumption-based inventory as David described to you all earlier. Oregon also estimates this emissions inventory and is working on updating them. These two inventories together provide a comprehensive picture of opportunities for emission reduction and a very unique approach that Oregon is taking to inform its PCAP. When you look at the data from both of these inventories, there are specific categories that contribute to the most emissions. Transportation is the single largest contributor to both inventories. Next is residential and commercial, which also represents the electricity and fuels used to heat, cool, and power buildings. And finally, the next highest is the waste and materials, which includes food and beverage, as well as those materials used for building that David also alluded to. Next slide. In addition to the inventories, our approach has also been informed by the Oregon Climate Action Plan to 2030 and the associated Transformational Integrated Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reduction Project Report, or TIGR. TIGR underscored the importance of our existing programs and regulations to reducing emissions, which in the context of PCAP are also key for funding shovel-ready projects. TIGR also identified a number of additional actions to accelerate emission reductions, with the most in the transportation and building sector. And while TIGR only focused on sector-based emission reductions, the roadmap identified the potential and need for action on materials management and other efforts that would reduce consumption-based emissions. Slide. Informed by all of the above, as well as multiple other analyses and resources, we've been working to focus the PCAP. Our proposed focus and associated possible actions are aimed at addressing those areas that contribute the most to the state's greenhouse gas emissions and have co-benefits. This includes, and is probably no surprise, transportation, commercial and residential buildings, waste and materials management. We are still receiving valuable concepts from partners that we are evaluating with the grant lens and reviewing data support actions for the inclusion of the PCAP. Slide. I'm going to dig a little deeper in that transportation category. So this sector is the leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions in the state, comprising an estimated 35% of overall contribution. Medium and heavy duty vehicles are responsible for 7.4 million metric tons of greenhouse gases, while light duty is actually at 12.1 million metric tons of greenhouse gases. Potential actions to include in the PCAP and then the grant include light duty zero emission vehicle incentives for low and moderate income, medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle incentives, and supporting development of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Reducing greenhouse gases from transportation also will have significant co-benefits, including the reduction of particulate matter, which especially impacts environmental justice communities throughout our state. Slide, please. Heating and cooling of our buildings account for a significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions. Incentives to improve the efficiency of existing buildings and also support energy efficient new buildings include things such as weatherization, appliance upgrades, which might be heat pumps or energy efficient water heaters, incentives to build new buildings beyond the standard or base building code to achieve additional energy efficiency. So that's referred to as REACH code. Buildings also impact the climate through the act of construction and manufacturing. Manufacturing the materials that go into them, reducing embodied carbon of projects at whole building and product specific scale. These actions offer a lot of co-benefits, including improved indoor air quality, especially from wildfire smoke in our rural communities. Slide. So this one tags along with some of the work that David already presented to you today. But a new analysis of EPA reveals that 58% of methane emissions from US landfills is a result of wasted food. And the emissions associated with producing that wasted food in the first place is 6 to 7 times higher. Example actions to address this might include expanding the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment Industry Partnership, grants for food waste recovery infrastructure, such as anaerobic digesters or composting, and grants to enhance landfill gas control. Another priority that has been highlighted by the White House Council on Environmental Quality is to reduce emissions resulting from the use of single-use plastics through grant opportunities. Such actions will also support many communities, including rural areas, indirectly through job and directly through reduction of waste. Slide. In summary, we're excited to continue the development of the PCAP actions with the lens towards creating a competitive, climate-centered implementation grant. Our timeline and next steps are to have a draft PCAP out by early January, that then we'll have a month for public comment, so starting in early January to early February. And then a final PCAP is due to the EPA March 1st. Implementation grant applications are due 1 month later, April 1st, 2024. And along all of this, we'll continue to focus on the development of that comprehensive climate action plan due in August of 2025. Thank you for your time today. That's what we have to present to you. If there's any questions, let us know.
Thank you, Morgan and Colin. And just to clarify or make sure we're tracking it, the governor has asked the commission to review and approve the recommendation. So I'm assuming that we would do that after the public comment period in February. Is that correct?
I'm going to defer to Zach because I'm not actually sure if you're having a meeting in February, so we might have to work that timeline out specifically.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. And I think that's with the legislative session, there was some worry that we might not be able to get everyone together. And so maybe thinking about the approach similar to what we did with the roadmap, which was to have the recommendations informed by the public comment come to the commission, and then the commission provide a thumbs up on the recommendations while then staff finishes up the last cleaning up of the report and writing of the report. So thinking our next Global Warming Commission meeting or Oregon Climate Action Commission meeting, we were thinking would be towards the end of January, which would give some time to be able to see what public input is coming in and shape that. And so maybe the week of January 22nd or a couple days after that.
It would be nice to make sure we get to see as much of the public comment as possible. So to try and sync up that timeline with when we're going to be meeting. Any questions for Colin or Morgan? Commissioner Apter.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you all so much. I am very eager, like all of us are, to make sure Oregon does everything we can to maximize the federal funding opportunity. And I recognize this one in particular is just a huge lift. So thank you to the DEQ and ODO team and other agencies for all the work so far and for this helpful update. I was just curious, I guess maybe first on process, recognizing this is a highly expedited timeline that you've been working under. Great to hear the tribal engagement. Was just curious, given that this is a statewide proposal, the extent to which local governments have had the chance to weigh in on initial drafting and kind of identify shovel-ready or other funding needs within the priority buckets.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Apter. I can start. I know staff have engaged in a number of different venues with local governments. I believe there was some tabling at the AOC conference earlier this year, I think just a month or so ago. A lot of engagement from local jurisdictions in the Lane County area, for example. I know a lot of engagement there. But I should hand it to Morgan to describe a little more specifically some of the local jurisdiction engagement we've been having over the last several months.
Yeah, thank you. So just a caveat, I've been on the job for about a month right now. But in summary, what has been happening over the last 3 to 4 months is direct engagement with a number of agencies, whether both local jurisdictions as well as state level partners. And that was to discuss what the CPRG is and what actions that they would like to see included. We also created a survey and got a number of survey results that went out to both state partners and local jurisdictions and tribal partners. So we also have had that. But you are right that this was very quick. So we're also looking backwards to other information that's already been provided and vetted, including in the TIG report and another piece of information that we already have. So we're doing our best there and have definitely had a lot of meetings to generate ideas to review for the PCAP.
Thank you. Relatedly, just looking at the timeline presented here, given that it looks like there will be just about a month for public comment and also then consideration from the commission, does DEQ or ODO, or have you thought about like key types of input that you will be looking for? I recognize you're not going to be able to, reconsider an entire plan, and you've already done a lot of great outreach and have great work to build off of. But if there's anything particularly that commissioners or members of the public listening in can think about in anticipation of this proposal being out, what specific types of input would be most useful given the upcoming March 1st deadline?
Yeah, I can start there, but I think one of the things we're trying to stay laser focused on with this priority climate action plan is on the federal priorities, EPA's priorities, making their priorities our priorities so that this priority climate action plan folds directly into the state application for implementation funds. And the reason for that is really is probably obvious, is to make our application the most competitive it can be to maximize the federal dollars that come here for climate mitigation. So to some extent, those federal priorities may not match all of our priorities here in Oregon, and wanting to be real upfront in this process with the commission and other decision-making bodies and with the public that we are approaching this plan and subsequently our application in a way that aligns with those federal priorities, even if to the extent those may miss some priorities we have here in our state. That's perhaps that's a bold decision on our part, but I think it's the right one if we are using this first portion of the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant program. That is the portion that really has access to the lion's share of those funds that are tied to this federal program. That is those implementation grants, the $4.6 billion that Morgan mentioned nationally. So that is. Commissioner, I'm not sure that's totally responsive to your question, but it's what triggered from this response for me, which is to really acknowledge that approach we're taking here. I think that approach may not play out in all states across the country. I can imagine that some states will treat it as their state priorities. What are those, regardless of whether they align with the federal priorities for implementation? But since the priority climate action plans are expressly tied to the implementation grants, that's the approach that we've landed on here. Morgan, anything else to elaborate or correct there in response to the question?
Just in terms of public comment period, we are intending to create a survey for quick response and also to get specific feedback so that we can be consistent in how we update and also what we collect from the public.
Any follow-up, Commissioner Apter?
Very helpful, and I think, yes, the form makes sense for streamlined and uniform input, so glad to hear that. I do have a couple more substantive questions, but want to allow other commissioners to chime in, or don't want to get us off track with the agenda. Happy to follow up.
No, we're doing well on time, so feel free to do follow-up.
Okay, thank you. So just on some of the potential activities that you noted within each of the priority sectors or categories for the application. On the transportation piece, I think all of those categories in terms of incentives for zero emission vehicles make great sense, especially again, given some of the existing programs and opportunities for additional incentives, especially for low and moderate income for light duty. Was just thinking back to David's presentation around consumption-based emissions from transportation, which I believe he noted were largely from vehicle parts and components, if I heard that right. So just wondering if there's opportunity to consider other actions in addition to these, which would continue to incentivize reliance on vehicles, and think about, again, existing programs in the state, like the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Program, if there's actions beyond incentives for zero emission vehicles that could be considered here to support VMT reductions as well. Maybe that's doesn't fall within the category of shovel ready, but figured I would raise that here, and then have a similar but different question around the materials portion as well.
Yeah, and I just want, maybe when you respond, Morgan or Colin, I wanted to make sure I understood like the list of things: transportation, materials management, and the built environment. Are those EPA's highest priorities? And what might be an example of something that, might be important in Oregon, but isn't part of what EPA is prioritizing? If you have any thoughts around that.
Great, thank you for the question. I'm going to start with Nora's question, just digging a little deeper on these measures. So again, we're still vetting a number of opportunities and actions. So I just want to be clear about that. In terms of what we included in this, it's really all about maximizing the greenhouse gas reductions that we can receive. And in terms of reducing vehicle miles traveled is a very important part of reducing transportation's footprint and greenhouse gases. The way that what you can see on the screen might already support that includes incentivizing the purchase of transportation vehicles, so buses, also same for school buses. So that's one way that we're looking at this. It is very tricky for us to figure out exactly what's perfect for the grant and the PCAP. We have to have shovel-ready projects that can have a 5-year time horizon for greenhouse gas reductions, which doesn't happen in a lot of programs. So it has to be something that can move quite quickly. And the other piece that is really important to consider is if it already exists as a regulation, CPRG funds cannot help fund that. So that's just another consideration, especially when we're talking about other potential programs. Let's see, an example of something that would be important for Oregon that may not be important for all. Was that your question?
Yes, correct.
Great. So developing local plans the first part of your question, let me get to that. An example of a federal priority versus a state priority. So federal priority for CPRG, again, short timeline to get reduction. So planning, grants are creating local plans, climate plans, has been really hard for us to justify in terms of the reductions on that short timeline. So that's something that I would say doesn't appear to be in the well thought of through the guidance from the EPA lens and doing a competitive grant application, right? Because we're trying to hit a certain amount of greenhouse gas reductions per dollar. In terms of something that might be important for Oregon, but may not be federally, I don't know that I have a great example off the top of my head for that one. So let me think about that for a moment.
Well, certainly the example you gave of local planning might be something that we would want to see, but it sounds like it's not part of their priorities. Thank you.
I just have one final question or thought, since no one else, I don't see any other hands raised. I was again, just thinking about the materials portion, and it seems like potentially some possibility to use CPRG funding, or at least propose in the application food waste reductions. And given, again, what we heard in David's presentation about needing to address food waste at the source, or particularly to address on-farm food waste, I think the production side, I was curious if there might be any overlap with the state's recent natural climate solutions work for supporting climate smart land management as it relates to agricultural practices, if there might be potential to leverage funding to supplement the work that is kicking off in full in that realm.
Excellent question. I'm not going to pretend to know all of the things, especially about agriculture, coming from where I'm coming from at DEQ. But I will say that we are continuing, and we're in conversations actually all the time with David and our materials management to understand what will happen, what we can do, and that will match the short time horizon. So I'm not actually, I'm going to have to go educate myself a little bit on this one to make sure that if there is alignment with the rest of the grant requirements for something like that.
And I believe the natural and working lands inventory is part of the longer
It is, yeah.
planning process. And so natural and working lands efforts can be highlighted through that longer planning process.
Absolutely. And that, yes, it is a priority within the comprehensive climate action plan, which we'll be working on through 2025.
And Chair, or Commissioner Apter, again, Morgan and I aren't steeped in that particular field, but are in close communications with our colleagues here at DEQ in our materials management. And so given that, I will observe that I think an answer to your question is, to whatever extent we have an existing program, existing authority to do something that mitigates those emissions, for example, from on-farm food waste, and simple lack of funding or scarcity of funding is curtailing the amount of emissions that we can mitigate in that, using that existing program, that existing authority, that will make it much more competitive. If we can show that we have this program set up, we simply lack sufficient funding, EPA, to do it, or to do it to its fullest. That is going to be, as we understand it from EPA, those are going to, just in general, those are going to be the types of programs that are going to be most competitive, most appealing to EPA, to get those short-term wins, to be able to show the CPRG and to show really the broader Inflation Reduction Act achieving measurable, quantifiable benefits in areas. If we have that, if we can show that, I think the answer to your question is yes, that should be competitive as we understand it.
Great. Thank you, Colin. Any other questions or comments that commissioners want to make?
Yes, I had my hand up, Commissioner
Excellent.
Reitman.
Commissioner Reitman?
Just for example, our local soil and water conservation district has shovel-ready projects. Are they well informed about this process, or should I be trying to get them in touch with you to put their hat in the ring, so to speak?
Those would.
Morgan, I don't know. What is your, Commissioner Reitman, what is your local soil water conservation district?
Gillum, Wheeler, let's say wildfire mitigation by clearing of juniper trees would be an example of a project that's ongoing and is running out of funding.
Got it. Morgan, are you familiar with that particular local jurisdiction engaging with us, or vice versa?
I'm not, I don't see records of if they have been engaged with us. Certainly the League of Cities, we've been working with them, as well as the Association of Counties. So it's definitely out there. I would encourage you, though, absolutely to have them comment on our draft once it gets uploaded in January.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Reitman. Any other questions or comments? Colin and Morgan, thank you so much. It's great to hear this work is advancing. It's really nice to hear that it's connected to the work the commission did with the Department of Energy that informed our roadmap to 2030. So it's great to have a way to kind of take all of that work and take next steps to help us continue on this path. So thank you.
Thank you for having us today. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Just want to also recognize that Commissioner Potowski has been with us for the meeting. So welcome, Commissioner Potowski. You came on quite a while ago, so I think you've gotten to hear most of the commission agenda, but.
Okay, thank you, Chair McDonald. I had operator problems with another computer and got on another one. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Well, with that, I think we are ready to take a break. So we'll take a 10-minute break to get back at 1:35, let's say. Thank you. Welcome back, commissioners and the public. For commissioners, if you could go on video so that I know you were back, and then we can get started. And Commissioner Reitman, it looks like you might have your hand up from earlier.
Oh, there.
Commissioner Shippentauer, good to see you. Looks like still have a few people to rejoin us. Commissioner Ross, are you back? Excellent. Okay, then let's go ahead and reconvene the Oregon Global Warming Commission meeting and go on to our next topic, which will be a presentation from the governor's office and state agencies on a proposal for how to invest the $10 million in funding we got for natural and working lands. So welcome to Debbie Colbert, who is here on behalf of the governor's office. And then I imagine you will introduce your colleagues that will be presenting agency by agency.
Good afternoon. I'm just going to make sure that this presentation is in the right form.
We are seeing your deck, but it's not in presentation mode.
Okay. Oh, how's that?
There we go.
Is that now showing in presentation form?
It is.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you very much for giving us time on the agenda today to give you a preview of what the 4 agencies that are eligible under the Natural and Working Lands Fund have been developing for submittal for the Global Warming Commission in January. So today we have representatives from each of the 4 agencies that are going to tell you a little bit about kind of what they're pulling together. We do expect to have a full written proposal in advance of the January Global Warming Commission meeting, which has not yet been set, but we anticipate having it ready in advance of that. And we have discussed with Chair McDonald the ensuring that we can have it submitted in advance so that it allows time, sufficient time for public comment, so that in advance of that January commission meeting. And then also kind of anticipating that having the allocations determined in January will give the agencies time to work with their legislative fiscal office and chief financial office to have budget technical adjustments done during the February short session. There we go. So we have been working together. Our goal was to present a cohesive proposal to the commission across all 4 of the agencies. You'll see that there are 13 areas proposed for investment. We've really tried to stay laser focused on the statutory direction provided and ensuring that there's a clear connection to tribes and environmental justice communities, landowners and land managers, focus on natural climate solutions with co-benefits, and very importantly, looking to leverage federal and other funds as we prioritize the area's investment. Across the 4 agencies, you'll see that there is distribution of the funds across natural and working lands. It would fund a combination of technical assistance, incentive, and on-the-ground projects. And you will see that all of the investment areas are focused on existing programs, not creating new programs. But at the same time, while they would add to existing programs, it's not really business as usual. This is really an opportunity for us to encourage new practices and invest in areas that advance these types of natural climate solutions where we haven't been able to advance them at a pace that we would want. So it's just a really good opportunity to encourage these new practices. You'll see that the package also focuses on immediate actions to sequester and store carbon while supporting some forward-looking needs and solutions. So that is just kind of an overarching description of the package. I'm going to hand it off to each of the 4 agencies to just tell you a little bit more about their investment areas. And then I'll do a wrap up that really kind of focuses in on the numbers at the end. So Chair McDonald, unless you want to kind of, not sure if you want us to just keep moving throughout this or if you'd like to entertain questions as we go, we're very flexible with whatever you would like the format to be.
Yeah, I would just encourage commissioners, if you have a question, especially a clarification question as we go through the presentation, feel free to raise your hand and Zach and I'll call on you. But otherwise, I'd say just go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, with that, I will hand it off to Stephanie Page to talk about the OWEB investment.
Great. Good afternoon, Chair McDonald and commissioners. Stephanie Page with the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. And I'll just go ahead. I think we're waiting for my slide to advance, but I'll just go ahead and start. There we go. OWEB is asking for $2.5 million altogether. And as you can see on the slide, the request will help support restoration, technical assistance, conservation management planning and implementation, and potentially easements and covenants on natural and working lands. And we've also requested out of the $2.5 million, $250,000 in administrative costs as allowed in House Bill 3409. In terms of how these funds would be distributed, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board is a grant-making agency, and we provide grants to eligible parties, including local governments, nonprofit organizations like watershed councils, land trusts, tribes, and schools and institutions of higher learning. And we would propose to distribute these funds as grants to the eligible entities that we work with, those types of organizations, and use our existing grant administration structure. One thing I wanted to mention before I go on to talk about the programs in a little more detail is that OWEB's grant administration process operates predominantly on a reimbursement basis. And so that means we conduct technical review of project applications, we award grants, we develop grant agreements, we project manage the grants, and as the grantee implements the project, they submit requests to us for reimbursement. So it may look for the first couple of years for a project, for example, that the funds have not been expended when in actuality, the grantee is in the progress of implementing the project and just hasn't billed us yet or hasn't billed us for the full amount. So I wanted to mention that, and now we can go to the next slide. So the 2 existing grant programs that we're proposing to leverage to distribute these funds are the Open Solicitation Grant Program, which includes on-the-ground restoration and technical assistance grants, and the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program. And this program includes grants for conservation easements and covenants, technical assistance, and conservation management plan development and implementation. So one of the values of using the existing programs is it does leverage the rules and the guidance that we already have in those programs, but we would also likely do some customizing to reflect some of the unique aspects of House Bill 3409 and the funds that are included in the Natural and Working Land Fund. So as part of that, we're proposing to prioritize projects for EJ communities and tribes, And we will select projects that have clearly identified climate benefits. And we do have mechanisms through those programs to do that. So I think I'll just pause there and see if folks have any questions, but that is a high level summary of what we are requesting.
Thank you, Stephanie. You included in the list that it may include acquisition of rights or interest in properties through the Ag Heritage Program. Do you have a sense of how much you might put towards technical assistance versus management plans versus property rights?
We haven't determined. I think one other thing I'll mention is that OWEB is a responsive grant agency, so we accept applications that come in, and then in this case we would evaluate them for those climate benefits, including carbon sequestration and resiliency, and then make funding determinations based on those evaluations. So I think one challenge with easements and covenants is and restoration projects for that matter, is that one or two projects could consume that entire amount versus wanting to protect some for technical assistance. But it does depend somewhat on what projects come in the door. I should also mention that my colleagues Jesse Kirschner and Taylor Larson from OWEB are also on with me. And so I want to thank them for being a part of putting this presentation together.
Thank you, Stephanie. Any other questions, Commissioner Apter?
Yes, thank you so much, Stephanie. Super exciting to see this initial proposal. Thank you for all the good work and thinking that you and the OWEB team have put into this. Well, first of all, really excited to see some of these initial, or the summary of prioritization, and specifically the call out around carbon sequestration, which of course is a major goal of this fund, as well as the intended priority to EJ communities and tribes. I was curious, I heard Debbie mention at the outset the goal of leveraging federal funding as something that is key kind of across agency proposals and use of funds. So wondering if you could speak to how you're envisioning that as it applies to OWEB's proposal, and also curious around separately the process that you laid out for reimbursing entities, if that's something that I assume you found has worked well, but if there's any consideration of whether that might be adjusted, given that these funds will hopefully be available in the near term, and something that might be able to be appropriated at the outset, or just anything more you want to add to that existing process.
Okay, absolutely, Commissioner Apter. I'll take those one at a time. So I think the first question was around leveraging, and a few thoughts there. I think the most clear opportunity for leveraging is in that conservation easements and covenants space. There is a federal program called the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, Agricultural Land Easement, if I'm remembering that acronym correctly, that does provide grants for easements and covenants, and it requires state match. So that is one opportunity for leveraging federal dollars. Another is the technical assistance grants could be used to develop or design a project that is then proposed to a federal program. So that's another opportunity for leveraging, perhaps in a slightly different way. And then finally, I would mention that many of the projects that OWEB funds are also eligible for funds from the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. So there is opportunities at an individual project scale to bring in some of those funds. And then one final thing I wanted to mention is talking about the technical assistance grants in OWEB's open solicitation program. We historically required match for those funds, but in order to make the funds more widely available, we reduced the match requirement for those dollars. So it does potentially reduce the leveraging opportunities, but it hopefully makes the program more accessible as well. And then the second question, I think, was around reimbursement. So OWEB developed a practice of a reimbursement-based program over the years in response to feedback from various audits as we were continuously improving the design and implementation of our program. So that's one of the reasons that we operate predominantly on a reimbursement basis. We do offer advances with certain sideboards. So a grantee could request an advance if they needed that cash to help get a project started. They do need to provide documentation to us within 120 days of receiving that advance, again, for good administration purposes.
Stephanie, not to put you on the spot, but do you happen to know off the top of your head what your OWEB's current leverage rate is? For every OWEB dollar, you often leverage X or Y relative to the, maybe not the technical assistance, but the open solicitations.
I don't have that right in front of me, Kathy, but I think I can find it by the end of this presentation. We're preparing our Oregon Plan biennial report that we're required to prepare, and that is one of the things that we look at. So
Great.
I will see if I can find that here in the next few minutes.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Any other questions for Stephanie?
It looks like no, I can't see if
I can't see any hands up. Debbie, you're cutting in and out quite a bit.
we'll just move on. Next
Yep.
we have ODFW.
Thank you.
Does that sound good?
Okay, just a sound check. Can you hear me okay, Commissioner McDonald?
Yes, thank you, Sarah.
Good afternoon, Chair McDonald, members of the commission. I'm Sarah Reif. I'm the Habitat Division Administrator with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. We took a two-pronged approach to our proposal here for the Fish and Wildlife portion of the fund, mainly looking at funding on-the-ground projects directly, and then also creating capacity to even further accelerate Oregon's acquisition of federal funds and better centering our restoration work on the goal of carbon sequestration. So really intentional with the projects that we brought forward for your consideration. Our total request is just over $3 million. As you may know, ODFW has been really active in tracking and successfully acquiring federal funds recently. Since the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, or IIJA as it's often referred to, and the Inflation Reduction Act programs began releasing funding opportunities, ODFW has successfully brought in more than $58 million to Oregon for fish, wildlife, and water projects. So several of the projects that we bring forward for your consideration here have either acquired or are in the process of applying for IIJA or IRA funds. Other federal funds that we were able to leverage include NRCS Farm Bill funds, Fish and Wildlife Service Wildlife and Sportfish Restoration funds, which are typically used at our wildlife areas, and Bonneville Power Administration funds that we access through our Willamette Wildlife Mitigation Program. So through these projects that we have in this package and our two proposed positions, we anticipate leveraging somewhere probably on the low estimate around $25 million in federal funds across the time frame of the natural and working lands funds. Next slide, please, Debbie. With our projects, we tried to, maybe that'll advance to the next slide. Well, she'll come around. With our projects, we tried to ensure good, here it goes. We tried to ensure good geographic distribution of our proposed projects, placing intentional emphasis on projects that would benefit tribes and underserved communities such as our coastal farmers. Our on-the-ground projects include tribally led projects on tribal lands, as well as projects on ODFW's natural areas, as well as private working lands. We tried to make sure that each of our projects has direct ties back to the priorities identified in the Natural Working Lands report. For example, our proposed projects, we've got one on the coast. This would be an estuary vegetation restoration and historic channel connection project in multiple locations within the Umpqua Basin. these are critical projects for blue carbon sequestration, and funding from the state would complement federal funds that are going toward tide gate replacement in these systems. Estuary restoration is identified in the Natural Working Lands Report as a priority action, given the significant role that tidal wetlands and seagrass beds play in sequestering carbon. In the Willamette Valley, we have 2 proposed projects, one led by the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde for forested floodplain restoration on tribal lands. That would be for restoration of riparian forest on one of their properties. And then the other project would be led by the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs for a fire risk reduction / oak woodland restoration project on their lands. So both of those actions are identified as well in the Natural Working Lands Report. And then lastly, in terms of our on the ground work, we have a proposal in the Columbia Basin. This would be for a landscape scale perennial bunch grass restoration project, which is another action identified in the Natural and Working Lands Report, with significant efforts to remove non-native invasive annual grasses that are threatening those systems and set the landscape on a trajectory of more frequent fire. So this would be a good project to kind of get things on a sustainable trajectory and be sequestering more carbon. It's a particularly exciting project that would take place on our Lower Deschutes wildlife area, but also that wildlife area is split into 2 large parcels, and in between is a checkerboard of private land ownership. And we have a shared position with the Natural Resources Conservation Service in that geography, who would prioritize working with landowners in that landscape to leverage Farm Bill funds to go toward this restoration project. So that's the on the ground component. And then we are also requesting support for 2 positions. We have a ton of ongoing restoration work targeting fish and wildlife on our 20 wildlife management areas that we have, as well as through our various regional habitat programs throughout the state. But we want to leverage all of that restoration work and the federal funding to more specifically target carbon sequestration. So these positions would do that. They would pursue and administer federal grants, really focused more on designing projects with those co-benefits of fish and wildlife, habitat restoration, as well as carbon sequestration, serving as a technical service provider to help restoration practitioners, both inside ODFW and out, with elevating that goal of carbon sequestration in their project design, as well as just the tracking and reporting and telling the story of ODFW's carbon sequestration and habitat restoration efforts. You'll notice in the package I've laid out that we're not emphasizing research here. We did scope a blue carbon restoration project as part of the planning for these funds, but in the end, we felt that the high cost of that research project and the long-term timing were not really a good fit for these funds, but we are exploring alternative funding sources for that work. So I think that is a good spot for me to pause and see if you have any questions for me.
Thank you, Sarah. And my understanding is that the 2 positions you're hoping to hire would be term positions, so you would not be anticipating that this would be an ongoing ask necessarily of the fund if we are able to get more funds, but you're looking at these as kind of term positions to take advantage of this opportunities that we have. Is that right?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair McDonald. Yes, that is correct. At least in our sort of initial planning, these would not need to become permanent positions, and so we would establish them as limited duration.
Thank you. Any questions for Sarah? Not seeing any hands. Thank you. And we'll have some time at the end that we can go back and ask questions. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it. Over to you, Danny. Are you presenting for ODF?
I am. I just didn't know if Debbie wanted to say anything in the interim. All right. Good afternoon. I'm Danny Norlander. I appreciate being here, Chair and Commission members. So I serve as the Climate, Carbon, and Health Analyst at the Oregon Department of Forestry. And I'm going to go over kind of our high-level stuff for the ODF and the forestry section here. So we kind of have it broken down into about 3 different segments. And the first of that is related to implementation of the climate change and carbon plan that the department developed and was approved by our board back in November of 2021, which really centers around climate smart forestry. And we have 2 different tracks there. One is really directed towards small landowners and forest managers, totaling about 1.5 million. And then the second one is aimed at tribal and traditionally marginalized landowners at 1 million. And both of these would kind of do the same things, just the audience is a little bit different on each one. They both really rely on partnerships that we have existing and ones that we would build through this work. And that would be used to incentivize and do technical assistance for climate smart forestry in those areas, and really work with tribes, conservation districts, watershed councils, and community-based organizations to do the more on the ground work. And part of the idea there is that they know their areas, they know the landowners, and they're a recognized kind of feature in those landscapes. So they'll be able to do more of the place-based integration that would be desired in those areas. They also have access to various federal funds that they could use to leverage via these funds, with the ultimate aim to increase sequestration and adaptation while ensuring that the forests remain a social and economic benefit for Oregonians, which is kind of the core part of climate smart forestry as the department has laid out. So it's got 3 different legs. One of that is adaptation, one is mitigation, and one is the social side. So we really want to make sure that we stay in line with what planning we have done and what targets we have established. There's 8 specific goals within that plan, and this could help kind of begin the implementation of all of that and the incentivization of all of that. I will point out that that was developed around the same time as the Commission's natural working lands proposal. So the proposal is highlighted within the climate change and carbon plan. So it's kind of in line with what has been discussed in this area before. You can go to the next slide. So then the third part is really pretty far forward looking. A lot of things happen right now, but we have to be prepared for what's coming down the road. So this would really be building capacity for climate ready seed and seedlings. If you don't know, ODF does have a seed orchard located actually in the middle of the Willamette Valley and around St. Paul. And we're looking for about $750,000 to establish new orchards at that facility. That would provide seed for adapted species and kind of diversify the variety of species that are available. And the seed orchards geared towards small landowners, and we can use it to provide seed for tribes and other nurseries around. We don't have a nursery anymore. That one was sold off after it closed at the end of 2 decades ago, end of the knots, I guess. So it's an existing program, it's successful, and it's well run. So it's a good opportunity for us to, look 20 years down the road to what seedlings and seed will we need at that point. And that can help increase the adaptation of our forests to ensure that we will continue to sequester and maintain those forests, even if there are shifts in forest type. So that one's actually a direct thing to the department there, to really make it so that our partners down the road and small landowners and tribes will be able to benefit from that asset. So that's my quick presentation of ODF's ask. In total, I think we're at 3.25 million. Happy to answer any questions. I see Commissioner Ford's hand.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I appreciate the presentation, and a couple quick comments. One, I also am glad to see the recognition of the need for the small forest landowner community here in the state. I think that's critically important, and they clearly need some help. And I think the money for the seed orchard is, or for your capacity for a climate seed. Climate ready seed and seedlings is like super important as well. both tribes and for small forest holders across Oregon. So I'm really appreciative of that work there. My question is specifically around the federal match, and I noticed in the previous presentation from Fish and Wildlife, they had some hard numbers that looked like they were working to get match on, which are impressive. Where's ODF on its capacity to be able to draw in federal matching dollars to help support the work that you've described here?
So it varies on program, and I do want to mention that one thing that was in the INR report were things like wildfire risk mitigation and urban forestry. Those weren't included in this proposal because on the urban side, they've been very successful in obtaining federal funds. So they have about 26 million, rough number, that they have gotten very recently, plus another part of 3409, HB 3409, is about $6 million that's going to DLCD with cooperation with ODF for urban forestry. And on the wildfire side of things, there's a lot of existing programs that bring in match continually or bring in federal funds continually. And those get matched largely by landowner dollars. And then we're currently looking at building capacity to be able to take in more federal funds. We just don't have that right now, so we haven't really been pursuing those. For these two, so a lot of that would be existing programs like Forest Legacy, but one legacy program can chew up the entirety of these funds. So it's finding the right place to be able to leverage those. And then the Seed Orchard has recently gotten 160,000 or so to do work related to this. So we are looking at ways to bring in more through that. But a lot of it right now is our limited capacity internally to go after additional funds. There are 3 positions tied to these, and part of that would be building those partnerships with the local organizations, but also working towards finding federal funds that could be matched for this.
No, I appreciate that, and I was going to ask you, and you preempted that, around the issue of staffing to help be able to draw in those federal dollars. It does take bodies to be able to do the paperwork, etc. So I'm hoping the governor's office will think kindly of ODF to be able to increase some staffing capacity to be able to do that. And the final point that I'd make, I don't see anything in here under workforce development. And it's one thing to build capacity for seeds, but it's another also, we need capacity for nurseries, we need capacity for people planting trees, we need capacity for people to do basic climate smart forest management activities on the ground. And there's quite a bit of dollars available, as far as I can tell, through the various federal programs that would give us a boost to help with our workforce development and capacity issues here in the state. So has there been any talk at ODF about that component and maybe trying to reach out to grab some of those dollars specifically to help with workforce development and capacity?
There's been some. We are working on a statewide reforestation strategy, and that's with a partner, a nonprofit partner, similar to what was done down in South Central Oregon with the Forest Service and in California also. So kind of that conversation on seed and seedling, where the bottlenecks are, where the workforce is needed for that, will largely go through that process, and wasn't included in this just because waiting for that effort to be completed before we start trying to flesh it out more.
Great. Thank you again for this presentation and for providing some more insight in your comments. Thank you, Chair McDonald.
Thank you. And yeah, I just want to reemphasize the points that David made of, the importance of getting technical support to owners of smaller properties. A high percentage of those landowners don't have the benefit of a professionally informed management plan. And so that's a really important need. that's out there, and do appreciate that this would be making a contribution to long-term seed supply. But I, like David, I'm very interested in us, when the time is right, to start to think about the workforce issues, especially associated with wild collection of seed. So hopefully we would see some ideas for something like that in a future proposal.
Yeah, and the Private Forest Accord did establish the Small Landowner Office, which is currently being expanded and built out more and more. Actually, like each month there's more about it, and it's more organized at each step. So that's another existing program that we can leverage to reach out and do technical assistance for small landowners. And they have funds for grants and stuff for those small landowners as well.
Great. Thank you, Danny. I'll follow up with you about that to learn more. Appreciate that.
Chair McDonald, this is Debbie. I just want to test my audio and just see if you're hearing me better.
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. I was having some technical difficulty. Well, if there's no more questions on the forestry proposal, we can move on to ag.
That sounds good.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair McDonald, members of the commission. My name is Isaac Stapleton. I am the Natural Resources Program Area Director for the Department of Agriculture. And I'm going to talk through the couple of proposals that we have for you today, totaling about $892,000. We focused on two initiatives. The first one being an invasive grass management strategy. Currently, ODA is participating with NRCS to implement an invasive annual grass management strategy that will engage state, federal, and local partners to support efforts around management of those invasive grasses in an effort to preserve, protect, and restore rangelands and forest lands and prevent those lands from conversion into predominantly annual grass-dominated ecosystems. This effort would support coordination and collaboration, as well as outreach efforts to identify those priority treatment areas for invasive grass management. It would also prioritize projects that align with several other programs, such as USDA's Working Lands for Wildlife Initiative, USDA's Grazing Lands Conservation Initiative, the Western Weed Action Plan, Oregon SageCon Partnership, and others aimed at protecting rangelands and forests from these invasive annual grasses and protection from fire and climate impacts. These funds, these $360,000 for this initiative, would leverage $1.7 million in federal funds through NRCS. Those federal funds would be directly for projects on the ground once these priority areas are identified. The effort also includes tribal participation, given the widespread impacts of annual grasses on tribal lands. Currently, tribes are involved in these efforts across the state in controlling those annual grasses and are certainly an integral part in a fabric of this project. This, like I've said or alluded to, this project will have direct impacts on ag, rangelands, natural and forest lands for climate resilient habitats. So that's the first one. The next one, Debbie, if you go to the next slide, is somewhat similar in nature in that it's developing a strategy. So this is the Oregon Native Seed Strategy effort. It's proposed at $530,000. It doesn't have a direct federal nexus in the initial creation effort, but once the seed strategy is created, federal funds could be sought to do projects on the ground. So this is an effort to establish access to reliable supply of genetically appropriate native seeds through collection, production, and storage. So a little bit similar to what you just heard from forestry for their forestry seed, but looking at native seed efforts or collection across the state. The effort would identify various needs and develop strategies to address them, such as identifying populations for collection, production efforts for reliable supplies of native seeds for restoration efforts. I would also provide funding to partners for seed collection, seed cleaning, grower technical assistance, and farmer co-op development. to make sure that there's enough supply when the seed is needed. It would include funding for tribal assistance and tribal participation in the development of the strategy. We've heard that there are limited resources for some tribes to participate, and so we're proposing stipends to tribes to participate in the strategy development, and then as well as provide funding for specific projects such as tribal nurseries growing culturally significant plants or first foods as one example. It's a critical effort with impacts on natural and working lands as well as forest lands. It has impacts on restoration efforts post-fire by creating access to appropriate native seeds for restoration of those ecosystems. And as I said, it's somewhat similar to the forestry one in terms of creating that climate resilient seed stock for restoration efforts. And that is what I have, if there are any questions.
Thank you, Isaac. Any questions for Isaac? One question. I'm assuming the invasive annual grass is going to look both at cheatgrass and Medusa head. Is that correct?
My understanding is yes, it would look at all like invasive annual grasses. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Questions for Isaac?
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, something funny is happening. Okay, hopefully you are seeing the proposed spend plan. Whew.
Yes.
So you just got a sense from each of the 4 agencies about these areas of investment for the funds. And I think it's such a great question about the federal fund leveraging and why kind of coming at this as a collective, I think helps us to make sure that we are covering all of the bases of the legislative intent. So as you heard, some agencies today can tell you exactly what they think they'll leverage. Others are going to be telling you about the potential or the areas they anticipate. But as a package, we're going to have a strong federal leverage component. And the same thing, like, you might hear one agency might not be addressing all types of natural and working lands. But again, as a collective, we are trying to make sure that our investments are hitting across all of our natural and working land sectors. So again, it's part of why we wanted to do this as a combined and collaborative state proposal to you. So if you take the numbers that we're proposing and you kind of across all the agencies, you'll see kind of the proposed spend plan. And again, these are funds that we can carry over past the biennium because of the way it was set up. However, as you'll see, we have a sense of urgency, and you've heard this from me before. We would like to get as much of these funds spent this biennium as possible, which is why we're moving so quickly with your process of considering the proposal so that we can get agencies kind of working after the legislative session when they've gotten their budgets adjusted. So you'll see between FY24 and 25, it's the majority of the spend. It's a little bit more weighted toward the second year just because we don't have as many months to spend. By the time we get the allocations made and then we go through the legislative process, we just won't have as much time to spend the money. But this is how the kind of spend plan would look. Obviously, there is the annual process of returning to you to kind of make adjustments. And also you'll see that this leaves some wiggle room for the commission to kind of continue to learn or have different priorities this time next year. So again, we really tried to kind of anticipate, be flexible, but also try to aggressively plan to spend the money as best we can. And then if you want to look at it across the agencies, this shows the kind of total spend plan by agency. And I just want things that might jump out at you. You'll see the ODA, it shows up as less. However, if you look at investments in ag and rangeland, it actually is more evenly distributed because that's a piece of what ODFW is doing. It's a piece of what OWEB is doing. And so just want to speak to that in case it kind of raises any questions. If you look across these 13 investment areas, 11 of them are directly linked to today or anticipated to be linked to federal funds. And it's really a broad range of funding. Bonneville, NRCS Farm Bill, NOAA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM. I actually meant to put BOR and Forest Service. So again, when you see the proposal, you'll see that it is substantially anticipated to leverage federal funds, which is consistent with the intent of the bill. And it's a pretty diverse range of federal funds that we would be looking at. I just finish by just emphasizing again, I kind of feel like I'm a little bit of a broken record, but we are moving as quickly as possible to get things ready for the commission in the hopes that we can get the allocations done in January with you and then get the necessary federal funds. I think that you've heard that this is really building on existing programs, again, consistent with the legislative intent, but amplifying and increasing the pace of some of the work that we want to get done to sequester carbon, to advance natural climate solutions. The fact that it is built mostly on existing programs, I think that really should kind of increase confidence with the commission that we can get the work done and that we can do it successfully within the next year, 2 years. And from our perspective, we would love to be in a position to support the commission in the annual reporting back to the legislature and really being able to demonstrate some outcomes for these climate solutions and carbon sequestration. So, happy for any of us to answer any questions. I don't know where we are with time, so hopefully we're meeting your timeline.
We're doing okay with time. We've got a few more minutes, so we can definitely entertain some questions. Can you go back one slide? I just wanted to make sure I was reading it. So it looks like you're proposing that money would be spent, most money would be spent during this biennium, but that there would be some expenses that would extend as far as 2028. How did you determine what was, what would come in those later years?
Really, we leaned on the agencies to help us understand kind of how they would be able to spend stuff. And as you see, majority is in these next 2 fiscal years, but an example is the invasive annual grass program. By virtue of the kind of work that they are doing, they anticipated needing to continue those efforts, over a longer period of time. It's not substantial amounts, but again, those are the kind of programs that you can't just turn them off after 2 years, but we are anticipating having some amount to carry them over into an additional 2 years.
Thank you, Debbie.
That's an example. We definitely placed a priority on programs that could be successful over the short term, but some of the forward-looking programs do take a little bit longer investment, and we just felt like those were good additions to the package that we were bringing forward.
That makes sense. Commissioner Ford?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing this broader perspective. I appreciate it. And I'm hopeful that the legislature will, beyond this initial 10 million, that will make further investments. So I think it's wise to spend now and over the next couple of years to demonstrate what kind of performance can occur so we can then justify to the legislature further need. One quick question, and I don't know whether Debbie, you can answer this, or I may ask Danny to answer this, but related to the Oregon Department of Forestry, are there new grant programs that are going to help facilitate movement of this money, or the grant programs that are in existence today, are they the vehicles that will help you do the spend that you need to do?
That one, Debbie.
I'll defer to you, Danny.
Okay, so I think we'd rely on existing grant programs that we have, as well as potentially intergovernment agreements, depending on the agency or organization that we're working with. So we wouldn't necessarily need to stand up any new programs or grant options.
Yeah, no, thanks for clarifying that. That's kind of what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure. Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
One, a comment and a request. I don't think the commission wants to micromanage the funds, and I'm sure the agencies don't want us doing that. I did appreciate your point that you would be coming back to us periodically and that there would be an opportunity to kind of take stock of lessons learned and consider changes to allocations, as the agencies see how the programs are rolling out. I appreciated OWEB's point that they're a responsive granting entity. I think it would be helpful to have some prioritization of the kinds of activities that would be of greatest interest for the two funds that OWEB is considering, just to give the commission a sense of, if they got all the proposals they wanted, how would they think about how to best prioritize that? I think that would also probably help grantees know what to pitch. So I would encourage in any of the agencies where there are options for how the money gets invested, that there's at least some language that talks about preference. It doesn't mean that that's the way it's going to end up being spent necessarily, but it just kind of give the commission a little more than a very broad program. So that would be my request.
Looks like
After, or do you want to respond to that first? Debbie?
I think that sounds great, and we can work with OWEB on kind of sharing some of the priorities if they have a number of grants, how they might prioritize. We're happy to do that, and that's part of kind of why we really see like opportunities to come back and make adjustments, because we're sitting here today in the hopes that we're going to get the kind of response, in the hopes that we will have the engagement that we will be depending on in terms of with the tribes and in environmental justice communities. We may be highly successful and need to come back and talk to you, or we may not get the response that we'd hope and come back and troubleshoot with you how you want to readjust. So there is definitely opportunity to learn and continue to work together, just either direction. And I don't know if Stephanie has anything she wants to add in response to your comment about a sense of priorities if you get a very strong response to grants, where your priorities might be. Stephanie, still on? There she is.
Oh, yeah, just appreciate the feedback, and we'll go back and do some more thinking on that. I think one other thing that I'm thinking about, just reflecting on this conversation, is if we do an initial solicitation and we get applications that maybe don't meet all of the things that we're looking for in terms of being proposed by EJ communities and tribes, for example, what do we do? Do we run another solicitation? Do we award proposals to what we've received? So that's just another thing I want to do a little more thinking about and would appreciate feedback on.
Thank you, Stephanie. That sounds good. Commissioner Apter, I saw your hand up earlier. There we go.
I have more of a process related question or questions. Okay. No,
thank you.
Good time. Great. Well, first, echoing everyone else's gratitude for all of the great work and this really strong initial proposal outline. Definitely agree and support the urgency and thinking around how we can best get this funding out there as quickly as possible. And also, of course, I think we all share the goal of wanting to make sure that these funds are as accessible and beneficial to the landowners and managers that they're intended to support. So on that, wanted to just loop back, I guess, to this slide, I think at the beginning of this presentation that laid out the process for between now and when the commission will, it sounds like, formally take up the final proposal. Was hoping, Debbie, you might be able to provide some clarity in terms of time frame for that public comment opportunity, especially recognizing the holidays coming up. Just want to make sure that we have are able to provide as much time as possible for input from landowners and managers and other communities and partners that want to weigh in here. And then maybe beyond that, Kathy, if you have any thoughts, or Debbie, how we then potentially incorporate that, any feedback received during the comment period in time for it to be, in time for the next Global Warming Commission meeting, or Global Climate Action Commission, as we will be named in January. So want to make sure there's clarity in terms of the timeline for public process, both when that will kick off and when the deadline for public comment will be, and then maybe chat through how we might incorporate feedback through amendments or otherwise ahead of the next meeting.
Chair McDonald, I could just talk about kind of like the proposal writing piece. You know, just if you, so honestly, we really wanted to get a feel from the commission today on how close we might be in terms of kind of meeting expectations, any major red flags from the commission itself on the package. So, I mean, our goal is to, I mean, one of the issues that needs to get nailed down is we don't know when the January commission meeting is. And so I would say that at a minimum, we've talked to the chair about having the full written narrative at least 2 weeks before the January meeting. Honestly, if the January meeting ends up being January 7th, that's going to be tough, right? Like, I have no idea when the January meeting is going to be. So we kind of need to reverse engineer based on once the set, but I mean, we are committed to getting it in at least 2 weeks in advance of the January committee.
Yeah, we're definitely looking at no earlier than the week of the 22nd. I think ideally we would get something posted even over the holidays, if possible, to give people as much time as possible to provide input. I'll recognize that that's also time when hopefully all of you are getting to take some time with your families and friends. So, but you know, I think the sooner the better, because I know there is a lot of interest in this opportunity that we have. And I know there's a lot of support for the fact that you have moved quickly. And so I think everybody appreciates that, but at the same time, I think would welcome input. The what I had envisioned, Commissioner Apter, was kind of similar to what we've done with earlier reports and the Natural and Working Lands proposal itself, where we had a set of recommendations, and then if somebody had a different way, for example, of wording or a different allocation of funds, in this case, that a proposal could be put forward for what changes they would like to see, and then the commission could consider the original proposal and or the modified proposal. I think in this case we would certainly want input from the agencies about any proposed changes, just to make sure that logistically they could be done. So that's another reason to kind of get the meeting or to get the proposal posted as early as possible so that staff on our side have a chance to kind of look at public comments and then work with the governor's office and the agencies to determine if, you know, if that's a possibility to make the kind of change that someone might be encouraging us to consider.
And Chair McDonald, just as a reminder, just for the statute, the criteria that the commission will be using to evaluate the proposal is the capacity of the agencies to actually do the work and the extent to which we are leveraging federal funds. So that'll be the criteria. And so if there were any substantial adjustments, that, you know, I think that would be, you know, hopefully with this preview and kind of this discussion, we wouldn't see any major swings, because that really, it really will be whether the agencies can do the work. And so we feel like we're putting together a proposal that is doable, especially within the timelines that we're proposing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to anticipate, but I wouldn't necessarily expect it to be substantial, and you know, I think people will defer to the agencies in knowing what they think is the highest priority and what can be moved forward as soon as possible. Commissioner Reitman?
Just a quick comment. I think, speaking for the ag sector, climate mitigation is not something that's been part of our thought process, even though a lot of the conservation work we do has a definite benefit. And so I guess what I'm looking for, and maybe, you know, this is a new program, this 10 million that we haven't had before. And so maybe just being able to quantify some of the existing work that's already being done, and you know, and try to describe what the climate benefit is. And it doesn't necessarily mean a new project, but just trying to understand for the public and for everybody to understand what the benefits are. So that's what I would like to look for.
Yeah, Commissioner Reitman, you know, we do have funding and we'll be getting capacity to develop a activity baseline and an inventory baseline. And so I think those are two places where we could kind of do the work that you're describing and talk about, you know, what is underway and has been implemented, and where Oregon is compared to the potential. I'm thinking about a project or a report that the American Farmland Trust did on adoption of climate smart agricultural practices that kind of documented that current level and what's the potential. So I think we can get some answers from that. Commissioner Ford?
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up on a comment I made earlier, Debbie, you asked, you know, if there are any kind of red flags from this discussion today. The only wouldn't say red, but certain caution that I would throw out there is, again, my concern around the workforce, and it would be nice to see some elements of this $10 million be dedicated towards you know, some workforce help, and whether that's specific dollars in a program or maybe just some staff time to try to run down some federal dollars, particularly in the forestry space, for workforce. So that to me is something that I'm certainly going to be looking for, and I'm hoping we can find a way to include some recognition and allocation of either some staff time in this money or some support financially for workforce development.
Commissioner Ford, just another reminder, we do have funding to do a workforce and training assessment. So that will at least help us take stock of where things stand and identify, you know, where we might have gaps that need to be filled. I agree with you. I like the idea of kind of thinking about maybe taking some steps relative to workforce someplace in here, but I also feel like we do have that funding for a study.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Chair McDonald. I guess I would just say that when we're looking at a 5-year spend here, maybe not in year one, but maybe a recognition in the 5 million plus that's going to be spent year 2 through 5, that we create a space now and acknowledgement that once we get a better sense of what the gaps are, we can apply some of these dollars to address those gaps.
Yeah, good, interesting point. Maybe just let me quickly take stock. Zach, how many people have signed up to provide public comment?
No one has put anything in the chat yet, but please go ahead and do so. And just, we did have a little time built into our next steps. So don't worry if you did want to make public comment, we will make time for that.
Yeah,
So,
I think I saw at least one person that looked like they were going to maybe do that.
Yeah.
Great. Commissioner Apter?
Thank you, Chair McDonald. Just to briefly go back to the process question, I'm wondering, so if I'm hearing correctly, it sounds like the goal is to provide a formal written proposal by no later than 2 weeks in advance of the next commission meeting. I think, in an ideal scenario, there would be opportunity for public comment on that formal proposal. And I recognize 2 weeks, if you're also considering how we as commissioners would then incorporate that into potential amendments that we would ideally then cross-check with agencies ahead of the meeting. That doesn't really leave time for public comment. So I'm just, I'm wondering if there might be an alternative or supplementary process that would then solicit input on this outline beginning in the near term, since this does a great job of laying out fund distribution and prioritization, and I think is enough for folks to respond to, just so we can start getting comments in now rather than asking for comments on the full proposal that I think we would have to only have open for, it sounds like, about a week, if that.
I guess I would say that, we're open to having informal conversation with stakeholders. I would not be comfortable engaging in some intermediate public comment, just because then it's a moving target for us. Like, we need to know, kind of what we're building out our written proposal around. So I welcome, and I think all of the agencies would welcome hearing from stakeholders informally, kind of questions, that kind of stuff. But again, I would be hesitant with the commission creating some new intermediate public comment process, so that, then we really are trying to write a proposal, get it in as fast as possible with a moving target. And so, again, I think that we have the kind of open communication that if folks are hearing anything today that they want to talk about, they're welcome to kind of reach out and we can chat. And just open to kind of more informal processes. But we really, if we're going to pull off getting it in as soon as possible, we really have got to kind of get this stuff nailed down for the purposes of the official public comment process. So I hope,
I guess
that makes sense, the kind of balancing act that we have.
I appreciate that. And I guess I would just press you and the agencies to try and get us something before the holidays, because I do worry that it's going to be pretty hard to get good, give people time to have the kind of input they want, and then to be able to cross-check it with you if there are some proposed changes. So the sooner you can get it done, the better.
I hear you.
We'll make it.
It will be a challenge. And so I can't commit. Just again, we need to kind of reconvene ourselves, kind of process what we've heard today in terms of kind of our pre-proposal, make adjustments, kind of do the narrative changes, and time is short before the holidays. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm
yeah.
just, we've got to figure out that balance. And I guess the other thing that would be helpful is like, what's the drop dead date for you to have for the agencies to have what they need to go before their fiscal folks to be able to make changes. So you don't have to answer that now, but just
we're already not meeting that. I mean, we have been given a special allowance that the letters are due before the commission is even meeting. And again, I don't want to kind of, I hear this kind of push pull about kind of the agencies having the time to do a good enough job to tell you what we can actually do versus a public comment process. And so I kind of feel like giving the agencies less than 2 weeks at this point so that we can have 2 weeks of, it is definitely a push pull. And I just want to caution us about trying to kind of shorten the timeline at the front end, because I think that doesn't help to get, we want to have a good proposal for people to comment on, right? And we want to make sure that it's stuff that we can commit to and feel like we can be successful. That's my only hesitation about trying to shorten the time period for the agencies.
No, I appreciate that. And if you just will live with that tension and do the best you can, we'd appreciate it. I would be remiss if I did not bring up one other topic, and that the folks that have been really helping set the foundation for blue carbon in Oregon. A lot of that work has been part of the Pacific Northwest Blue Carbon Working Group, and they've gotten support over the last few years from Pew Charitable Trust, or Pew, and I know that they were hoping to see some investment in kind of that continued collaboration, funding to support continued collaboration of the group of folks that have been meeting on blue carbon. So happy to point you in the right direction of who you might just talk to see. I didn't get any details on what they were interested in, but just heard that they were interested in some kind of resources.
Chair McDonald, I'm just making sure I heard that correctly. So they're asking for some of the funding for their blue carbon work?
I think they're asking for some investment in continued improvement of our blue carbon information.
Okay. I believe that we have elements of kind of blue carbon ecosystem incorporated into the ODFW proposal, but we're happy to follow up if we can get that contact information.
Yeah, happy to send it your way. Thanks. Okay. Again, thanks to the leadership of the governor's office and all the agencies for really jumping on this and pulling together some great ideas. And we'll look forward to seeing more detail and providing feedback at our next meeting.
Thank you so much for giving us so much time today to kind of run through this. And we're just really excited. I mean, what an amazing opportunity that we've been given through this fund. And we're just extremely invested in demonstrating the success of this for many reasons, because of the good things we can get done for climate, but also to show that we can put these kinds of dollars to kind of those efforts and make a difference. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much as well. With that, Zach, did anybody raise their hand for presenting?
Yes, we have two folks who let us know that they'd like to make public comment. We'll start with Joe and then Josie. If anyone else would like to make public comment, please drop a note in the chat or raise your hand so I can see that you'd like to. So Joe. And Abby, if you can unmute Joe, that'd be great. Thanks.
Joe,
Can you hear me?
we can.
Okay,
Welcome.
great. This is Joe Liebezeit. I'm the Assistant Director of Statewide Conservation at Portland Audubon. And I'm here to provide testimony today on behalf of our over 12,000 members across the state. Our main interest is with this work is the co-benefits for wildlife and habitats, which a lot of this work and these projects could help. And I have been engaged on the Natural Climate Solutions Coalition for a number of years. The first bill attempt, and then the second one where we got the 10 million engaged. And it's really great hearing today from Debbie and the others in the agencies about this first tranche of money and how it's going to be allocated and spent, and the projects. I've been impressed with the focus on outcomes and the leveraging of the federal funds, which has been successful to date. And I understand the urgency and the speed needed. The one thing I'm not hearing from the agency's projects is the tying back to the whole point of this is, by 2030, we want to sequester 5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide, and by 2050, 9.5 annually. And I hope in the proposal that the agencies are going to be quickly preparing in the next week, just kidding, that they will be able to try to make that connection to these projects. And how is it going to lift, and how is it actually going to, what are the metrics going to be in terms of the contribution towards sequestering carbon? Because that's what this is all about. And I appreciate that this first group of projects are, it can probably low-hanging fruit or existing programs. But I do think that in the future, as this program unfolds more, we really need to think about prioritization of what projects are going to have the most bang for the buck in terms of sequestering most carbon. I think that has to be really a big priority moving forward. And I get right now, we're just starting the program. We need to get things going quickly. And so maybe there's a little, leeway there in terms of that. But I think that's, for the future and for the next coming years, that's what we need to really focus on. So again, I really appreciate the presentations today, and I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate your comments.
All right, the next one up is Josie.
Josie?
And Abby, if you can unmute Josie, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yes. Okay, good. Hello.
Welcome, Josie.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, welcome.
Okay. All right, sorry. My name is Josie Kerner for the League of Women Voters of Oregon in the forestry portfolio. Thank you for this opportunity to comment on the Institute for Natural Resources INR report. I am addressing my comments to the forestry section. The League of Women Voters of Oregon believes that all benefits of forests, ecological, human, and economic, are inextricably connected. Healthy forests are essential to habitat for a future diversity of plant and animal life, to the hydraulic cycle, and to carbon storage to mitigate global warming. We also believe the full accounting of all costs, including cumulative ecological impacts of timber harvest and other forest uses, must be considered in forest activity decisions. Many of the best climate-smart forestry practices recommended by most carbon scientists, such as by Dr. David Bevelaw, among many others, were not included in the report but are awaiting further empirical data. The forestry recommendations were especially weak, leaving out longer rotations and protecting mature and old growth trees as some of the least costly and most efficient ways to reduce CO2 from the atmosphere. We noticed in the forestry bibliography sections seem to be very selective for timber products rather than greenhouse gas reduction. It focused on storing carbon in long-lasting wood products and using woody biomass and biofuels rather than more obvious and effective choice of protecting more mature and old growth trees. Nor did the report account for the CO2 and energy costs for harvesting timber for timber production, transportation, and the burning of woody biomass. The one reference to the topic of mature and old growth as carbon sinks was that the carbon sequestration was overrated, which is a minority scientific opinion. We would suggest that the technical team for forestry be expanded to include more than 2 carbon scientists, and that this section will be revised. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie. Appreciate your comments. Anybody else sign up?
I don't see anyone else in the chat or with a hand, but maybe take 10 seconds to see if anyone else wanted to be able to make a public comment. Oh, I think I see a hand from Mike B.
Excellent. Welcome, Mike. Mike?
And Abby, if you can unmute him, which I'm sure you're working. There we go. Cool.
All right. Thank you, Commission. I would agree with that last comment being made that a Nature article just came out recently from the World Resources Institute, kind of implying that harvested wood products really aren't the climate solution mitigation that we think it is. It's missing a lot of opportunity costs that a lot of models are not including. I included that actually in my public written comment, so commissioners can see that. So I just wanted to highlight that again. And then also, the first comment I would also agree with is that in the presentation, there wasn't really any discussion kind of along the lines of what the emissions reduction would be. So it would be good to see what that pathway is for the commission, because if we're funding practices and not knowing if there's actually any emissions going on, like reduction wise, it would be harmful for the future for getting money from the state. So I would just kind of reiterate the overall goal was net carbon sequestration with certain pathways by 2035 and 2050, and make sure that future funded practices kind of focus on that. Thank you.
That's great input. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Okay. Well, thanks again to everybody who submitted comments in advance of the meeting. As a number of us stated, they were very, very helpful comments, lots of detail. And again, to those that just provided comment just now. With that, I will propose that we close the December 11th meeting of the Oregon Global Warming Commission, and look forward to seeing everyone in the new year when we will be the Oregon Climate Action Commission. Anything from you, Zach, before we sign off?
I just put up a quick look ahead for folks, but this came up in the meeting that we're likely shooting for the week of the 22nd for our January meeting, and likely topics on the agenda are the Natural Working Lands Fund proposal, further discussion of the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, Priority Climate Action Plan, and then likely a legislative session preview, as there may be things that the commission is interested in there. Maybe a couple of other topics still working on the agenda, and look out for a doodle poll very soon.
Thank you, Zach. And with that, we are adjourned.